Alright, everybody. For today's critical thought, as you can see, I am in a new locale around here. Thanks to my smartphone, I can now be anywhere in my home and doing some recordings and talking about game design. Right now I'm on a couch here, which means if I wanted to, I could just lay down. We can discuss game design that way. But we've got a really good topic today. We're going to be discussing the difference between level design and environmental design when it comes to video games. Now, typically, these two terms are used interchangeably by a lot of developers, especially if you go on job sites and boards. But I feel that in today's market, you really do need to differentiate the two when it comes to the philosophy of world generation and level design. And this is especially true thanks to the rise of the open world genre, with games everywhere from Assassin's Creed to Horizon Zero Dawn, Far Cry, even stuff like Shadow of War, Batman Arkham, and so on and so forth. But to get things started with today, I want to discuss, or we're going to break down, what I feel is the big difference in the two terms. So the first thing we're going to talk about is environmental design. Environmental design, in my opinion, refers to world generation, or building the game space as livable or as breathable, I guess could be a better term, as possible. This is the act of not just generating a bunch of random platforms or some crazy MC Escher maze that you want to call a school or a hospital, but trying to build a living, breathing world. Now, I asked this on our Discord channel regarding where do people feel realism works in this equation when we're talking about obviously unrealistic or fantasy environments. And one of the big things someone mentioned was the idea of consistency in terms of its design. So let's say I'm building a world where the entire world is covered in snow. There's no such thing as 4 seasons. It's all winter all the time. If that's the world that I'm going for, then obviously there's not going to be anyone walking around in, midriffs and bikinis anywhere. Or there's probably not going to be the invention of ice cream when everything is frozen to begin with. A while ago, I came with an idea for a setting for a video game that would be essentially a world where there is no sunlight anymore. It is perpetual darkness 100% of the time. And one of the things I started to think about was, how would people live in a world when there is no more natural light? And when we talk about environmental design in this kind of capacity, there's a lot that goes into the architecture, the philosophy. Again, you are trying to sculpt a world that this game is going to take place in. And the proof that this has worked is with some of the most outstanding titles we've seen. From games like Horizon Zero Dawn, the Far Cry series, even stuff like Soulsborne, where it feels like a real place. It doesn't work on our version of reality, but this looks like some place people could have lived and worked, and of course a lot of them died in these cases. But the point is, there is a logical consistency when it comes to how this world is laid out. If I'm building, an upper crust mansion or manor that we're going to play around in, I expect to see very wide and tall doors. I'm going to see, very long tables, expensive paintings. Again, it's supposed to look like this is a place that somebody lived in. And when it works, it does a lot to elevate the storytelling of your title. When we've talked about before the idea of environmental storytelling, such as in games like Prey 2016, the Soul series, and probably some horror games as well, environmental design is a huge facet of that. Because again, the world around you is supposed to tell the story, not just you standing there and watching a cutscene for 20 minutes or less. And again, something like in Half-Life 2 would be an example of really good environmental storytelling as well, with how the world itself kind of explains where things are supposed to go. We can even use the example of having lighting to guide the player, or if I look into the horizon way in the distance, I can see, let's say, an impressive building, and that kind of clues me in that maybe I should go there. Now, The problem, though, with environmental storytelling by itself is that it tends to lead to a world that may look rich, but doesn't really have much substance to it. I've said this before about lesser quality open world games, where if you imagine my screen and everything around me as a game map, only specific points on the map actually have content and things to do in them. If you look at the open world style, or as we call open world style from the Ubisoft games, it's where the points of interest come into play. Everywhere else on the map, you're just wandering around from point A to point B. But only at those specific points will something happen that engages the player. If we talk about in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the points of interest would be stuff like the dungeons, temples, towns, stuff along those lines. Some open world designers have been trying to make use of what's commonly referred to as an AI life system. While that term was originated with the game Seaman, and if you are young, yes, there is a game called Seaman out there, it was really first started to see that depth explored with the Stalker series. What happens is, despite how big the game space is, the AI will basically wander around on its own. It's not like a typical third or first person shooter where when you get to a specific trigger point, then everything happens around the player. In Stalker, you could be wandering around and just so happen to stumble across a bandit raid, or animals attacking survivors, or even just come upon the aftermath of one of those fights that you completely miss because it happened without you. Now, with that said, though, switching gears to talk more about level design in this regard, level design, in my opinion, is the act of building a constraint or a set challenge for the player. This is the idea of building something that's meant to affect or to test the player in a variety of ways. And what happens is that you're thinking about things in a more constrained or limited view. To give you an example, in Grand Theft Auto, you have the world or the different areas that you can explore. But then you have these specific maps. You have the specific missions that will either take the player into a set point, or they can only operate within a small circle or small area within the overall game space. Now, talking about level design further, we can also include things such as enemy placements, specific architecture in the environment, or even stuff like a unique challenge or situation. So, if you look at something like, again, with Far Cry or the open world genre, those are once again the points of interest that are testing the player. I'm trying to get my eyes just right on the camera there. There you go. But, again, the idea is that you are testing the player on specific conditions, and the game is balanced around that. And good level design, that's going to be saved for another topic or for another video because there's too much to go into there. But when you're thinking about your game in terms of both environmental and level design, it's not a case of push and pull or one or the other. The best games out there combine the two into one special or one element of your game. And the best example, again, would be the Souls series. Let's take Dark Souls 1, for instance, with Blighttown. If we talk about Blighttown from an environmental standpoint, it is a decrepit shanty town that exists underneath the land. There are bugs all around. It's a miserable place to live, made even more so by the, of course, giant swamp of poison all the way at the bottom of it. There's a unique aesthetic to the level. There's background and lore that goes with it. And it was designed, again, to encapsulate this just mess of an area where everything just seems to be barely hung or strung together. Now, from a level design standpoint, we can talk about Blighttown in terms of where the enemies are placed throughout the environment, the specific situations the players are going to run into, such as those annoying pygmies that shoot the toxic darts at you. Of course, the infamous elevator that you have to quickly walk along or you're going to fall to your death. And then what happens when you get down into the swamp with more of the bugs and, of course, those giants throwing boulders at you. So, as you can see, from an environmental standpoint, Blighttown exists. It was built to look reasonably like an actual place. And then the challenges of the area seem to be more organically grown from that environment, as opposed to, again, older games where it could say, you must explore a hospital. And the hospital is just nothing but like a series of platforms floating around in space. And again, that's one of the big differences between game design today and game design from the late 80s into the early thousands. With the growth of environmental storytelling and environmental design, you're trying to build something that looks like it could actually exist. And if you can combine gameplay or level design on top of that, it will lead to some very interesting and very unique challenges that, just like in the Souls series, they become memorable for the player. But to wrap things up for today, when it comes to environmental and level design, you're thinking about things, you're basically having two different sets of questions. From an environmental standpoint, you're trying to think about, how does this world work? How do people, live and explore? What's, popular culture here? And for a lot of designers, it can be hard to think about like this. This is where a good fiction writer can come into play. And also having a strong idea as to how this world works. What we talked about before, the idea of having a Bible for how everything in your world came to be and how things work can help you. Now, from the other side, things with the level design, this is when you're thinking about, okay, my mechanics are this, 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 and this. How do I use that to test the player? How do I build elements into this world or into these specific sections that are meant to push the player, to challenge them, and to make them learn? And like I said earlier, if you're wondering what goes into making good level design, well, we're going to save that for another piece. So to wrap things up for today, here's my set of questions for you folks watching. First, besides obvious examples like Prey, Horizon Zero Dawn, Zelda, and so on, can you think of games that had really strong environmental design? And of course, on the other hand, can you think of games that may not flesh out the world all that well, but had amazing level design? Stuff that you still remember to this day. And can you think of games, besides one that we've mentioned, that got that marriage between them correctly? But with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until our next video, have a great night. Before we get to the credits, just want to give a quick shout out to the fans and supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/GWBycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.